All right, and welcome to those of you joining us on YouTube as well. All right, we want to thank Itasca for sponsoring this webinar. Sponsors like Itasca help us to keep these webinars free for everybody. Contact me for more information on sponsoring if you are a company or if you know of a company that would like to sponsor our webinars. And you can also help us keep these webinars free. At the end, you're going to be taken to a page with a bunch of resources. Now, I've heard a lot of different things. If you are watching us on a computer versus a tablet or something like that, this should pop up in your browser window. If you're on mobile, it may not work, but if you are on a computer, you'll be taken to a page with a bunch of resources for things you might be interested in, such as our native plant guide, rain barrel information, and so much more, including our virtual tip jar. So if you're enjoying these webinars, I do encourage you to help TCF continue to do all the really awesome stuff that we do, because we do so much more than just webinars. We are here to protect land and protect water. So you can also check the box to become a member so that you can enjoy our wide variety of members only stuff. And with 2022 being the 50th anniversary of the Conservation Foundation, we have some really great stuff in the works. So follow us on all the social media platforms to learn more. All right, that's enough of the housekeeping. Now on to the program. Here we go. All righty then. So Garden for All Seasons. So I called it this because the idea behind this presentation is to look at how we can make our gardens so that we've got interest all year long. So we want to have stuff blooming as early as possible in the spring, big explosion of stuff in the summer. And then even in the winter time, like right now, we want to have some interest going on there. We don't want it to be just, bare and kind of blah. So we want to be thinking about how we can keep interest in our garden all year long. So this is us at the Conservation Foundation. This is our mission. So we're out there to improve the health of our communities. We work on open space, like I said, clean air, clean water, clean land, and we want to take care of it as best as we can. And we are an accredited land trust, which is a really big deal in the land trust community. So if you are not local to us, check out findalandtrust.org, and I'll put that up a little bit later too. But then you can find your local land trust and see what kind of awesome programs they've got going on. All right, I saw this quote and the timing on it was perfect, and I just had to share this. Anyone who thinks gardening begins in spring and ends in the fall is missing the best part of the whole year, for gardening begins in January with the dream. So hopefully, like me, you are dreaming now of all the great things you want to accomplish in the coming spring and summer. Maybe you're looking at a seed catalog, a plant catalog. Maybe you're sketching things out. Maybe you're doing some research online, looking at pictures of gardens. There's so much to do now to start that dream. So why use native plants? For those of you who are not familiar with native plants, first off, they are 50 to 60% less costly to maintain than traditional gardening, right? So we plant this, and then we get this. And growing up and, the traditional thinking was, oh, that's so bad. It's going to put holes in the leaves and they're going to eat the plants. That's kind of the idea, because when we have that, look at this, right? In addition to the butterflies and the moths and the things that we also get, we're also feeding the birds. Birds need caterpillars to feed to their young. It's a really, really important food source. So if you don't have caterpillars, if you're not promoting those caterpillars, you're not helping the birds. And yes, of course, when we get those birds, we're also going to get these birds too. But it makes your yard a part of the ecosystem, right? It's a part of nature instead of being apart from nature. We want to be all involved. We want to be helping all those pollinators, helping the birds, taking care of our yards as best we can to make them better habitat. So why are they less costly to maintain? Well, a lot of it has to do with that really deep root system. So our native plants in this area, their roots can go down up to 5 meters deep, right? That's super deep. Things like compass plant, their roots can go down sometimes 20 feet. It's insane. Versus some of those traditional non-native species that we put in, whose roots really only go down maybe at most a foot. Kentucky bluegrass, that, traditional lawn grass that we all have, the roots are only 2 to 3 inches deep. That top 2 to 3 inches of soil dries out really fast. As any of you with houseplants knows, that top little bit, it dries out really quick. And so that's why we have to keep watering our grass all summer long, is to keep it moist. Whereas if we use buffalo grass, which I challenge any of you who are not, big grass nerds, I can't even tell the difference between the two. All right. So buffalo grass looks at the surface a lot like Kentucky bluegrass, but look how deep those roots go. That means even in the heat of summer, when we go through those periods of drought, it doesn't care, because its roots are way deep down, collecting water, collecting moisture out of the soil that's deep down, even when those top 2 to 3 inches dry out. Prairie dropseed, another gorgeous, in my mind, just as ornamental as fountain grass, right? Lots of pretty things. They're not just weeds. So many people hear native plants and they think we're talking about weeds. Most of the things that people would qualify as weeds are actually non-native invasive stuff. So completely different things. And native plants are just as ornamental, just as beautiful as the traditional non-native things that we plant. All right, so as we mentioned, this is a great time to start planning your garden. Now, this is a much more professional design than what many of us would be able to do on our own, especially me, because I'm not an artist. But you can start making these plans. So take a look at your yard, take a look at the area that you want to plant, and just sort of sketch it out. Now, you want to make sure you measure accurately so you know the size of the area. But, a couple of quick measurements with a tape measure, you can get as accurate as you want. Most of the time, it's not going to really matter that much. But take your time, look at descriptions of the plants. How big is this plant supposed to get? And believe it when they say that it could get, if it says it's going to get 5 to 12 feet tall, assume you're going to be closer to that 12 feet tall, right? 5 feet is if they're really stressed and not in great shape. So believe what the descriptions say, and a lot of times they'll say how wide they get too. So you can use that then to also help inform your diagram when you're trying to draw these things out, to visualize how big these things that you're planting are going to get. So like I said, this is a more professional one. All right, this is something I sketched out. I'm helping a school design their garden. There's a lot of mistakes here. No judgment, please. But this was my attempt at a sketch of what we want to plant for this garden. So the big challenge for me is always, don't put too many different species in there, because I want to plant all the things. So limit yourself in a smaller garden on numbers of species, right? Don't put too many different things in there, or it can start to look a little cluttered and messy. And, some things are going to die out. Other things are going to really thrive and start to take over. You can work on it then. But to start with, have a small variety of things there. All right, and we want to think year round. And that's really the focus of this webinar tonight, is to really get everybody thinking about the lifespan of your garden, right? So we want stuff that's going to come up in the really early spring, like this bloodroot here, right? Gorgeous flower. This is one of the first flowers that comes up. When I go out looking for spring ephemerals, it's usually gone already. So if you've got a woodland, the leaves that are behind afterwards are still just as nice. But it's got a really gorgeous flower too. So super early in the spring, when you're just dying for some color, this is a really great one. And then we get a little bit later in the spring, we get other colors and other things starting to pop up. And then in the summer, when things really start to explode. And then in the fall, when the asters kind of take over. And then even in the winter, right? We'll talk about this too, some good examples of things that are going to give us winter interest, and the different ways that we can have winter interest. in our gardens. All right, so this is what I want you all to be thinking of as we're going through this, of making sure that we've got stuff blooming, not just for us, because, you know, obviously when we've got stuff blooming, it's going to look nicer, it's going to be more attractive, it's going to feel more intentional, but also for our pollinator friends, right? We don't want them starving in the early spring, or, you know, not having that fuel to get those monarch butterflies down to Mexico. So we want to be thinking, we want stuff blooming as long as possible because it's good for us, but it's also good for the ecosystems as well. So if you want to really get kind of geeky in all of this, you can use Google Maps or Google Earth. This is my house here, and the area I've got circled in red was a pond when we moved in, but it was put in really poorly and the liner got holes in it. And so we're going to be redoing it. But knowing the size and the scale of the area that you're going to be working in can kind of help you design it better. Looking at this, I can make some assumptions about, you know, how big an area I want to plant. I can sort of fill in there with how big the pond is going to be versus the shoreline of the pond. I can see how the lines are going to look with my fence and with the side of my house there. A lot of stuff to take into consideration. So Google Earth will get you a much more detailed, but even just regular old Google Maps, you know, maps.google.com, you pull up your address and you can get a nice overview of your house to look at it kind of from above. You also want to understand your conditions. So a good friend of mine has a saying, right plant, right place, right? You can try as hard as you want to shoehorn in your favorite plant, but if it's not in the right conditions, it's never going to do well. And it may just die off and you'll never see it again. So rather than wasting money trying to shoehorn plants into the wrong place, understand the conditions that you're planting in, as well as the conditions that the plants themselves like. So is it sunny? Is it shady? Does the area flood frequently? Or is it bone dry? What's the soil like, right? All these things to take into consideration when you are selecting your plants. You know, it's not good enough to just say, and believe me, I'm guilty of this too. Oh my gosh, that flower's so pretty, I have to have it in my yard. Okay, but if it's something that likes sandy soils, it's never going to do well because my yard is very heavy clay. So right plant, right place. And one of the ways to figure out what your soil is like is to do a soil jar test, right? This is a nice at-home thing. Now, you can take soil samples and send them off to your local extension and, you know, pay a small fee and they'll send you back whatever. There's a really easy test you can do at home. Take a mason jar or a peanut butter jar or a pickle jar, whatever kind of glass jar you've got. Fill it about halfway with soil. Now, the soil, you want to take the soil from where you're going to plant. If it's an area that's been amended frequently, you know, we've got an area we've put mulch for the last, you know, 10 or 12 years. If I really want to see what the soil is like, I got to dig down a little bit. So make sure you're getting a representative sample of the soil. Don't get any worms in there, any bugs, and don't get out as much of the, you know, organic matter, roots and things like that. You don't want any of that in there either. So fill your jar about halfway, add in about a teaspoon of dish detergent. So, you know, your Dawn, whatever you wash your dishes with, throw in about a teaspoon of that. Fill the rest of the jar, you know, almost to the top with water. Screw your lid on really tight and then give it a shake. Now, you know, we're not going crazy on this, right? They're not maracas. We're not like, woohoo. Just give it a nice roll, get everything kind of mixed up. Make sure you get that soil kind of just really going in there. And then let your jar sit. Check on it in about an hour and see what's happening. And then, you know, give it about 24 hours to really settle. So what's going to happen is the sand, the really heavy particles, those are going to fall to the bottom first. Then your silt, and then your clay is going to be in suspension for a while. So when you check it after about an hour, you're still going to see the water being kind of cloudy, and that's those clay particles still in suspension up there. So when you leave it sit for 24 hours or so, the water should clear up, everything should settle out, and then you can take some measurements, right? Just hold a ruler up to the side of the jar and you should see those lines. So the bottom part, like I said, is going to be the sand, followed by the silt, followed by the clay. Make a mark on the jar maybe, or just, take some measurements there. So if you've got 3 inches of material and 1 inch is sand and 1 inch is silt and 1 inch is clay, you're going to know you've got about 33% of each of those in there, right? So whatever your measurements work out, then we go to this soil triangle over here on the right, and we figure out where things are going to line up. So if you figure out you've got about 30% sand, you're going to go on that bottom part there where it says 30 along the bottom axis there. Follow that line up until it intersects with the silt and with the clay. So if we take let's take the middle jar there. That's 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. So if we follow that up on our chart there, go up to 40%, and then on the silt side, where it intersects with 40% there and the 20% clay, we find we're smack dab in that brown loam area. So that tells us that's what our soil is like. So that's kind of a medium loamy. You'll see that description in there. Unlike my backyard, that is heavy clay, I'm going to be smack dab in that sort of cream colored part towards the top of that pyramid. So just informs us a little bit about what our conditions are like. And spreadsheets are your friend. Okay, I'm getting really nerdy on you here, but here's something that I like to do. So if you keep a spreadsheet, every time you come across a plant that you like, just add it to your spreadsheet. Even if you never have any intentions of putting it in your yard ever, just add it to your spreadsheet. Put in there what the name is, what the sun conditions are that it likes, what the water conditions are that it likes, just really general. And then, you can find this stuff if you go on like the Prairie Moon website, they've got all these details about your plants. And then you've got your bloom dates. So those dates in the middle, that's when these bloom. And I also like to make my bars the color of the bloom, just kind of to give me an idea just at a glance of what colors I'm going to have blooming. So just keep this chart. Now, when you need an area to plant, you can always sort this then by the sun and the water conditions, so that, if you know the area you're going to plant now is full sun and dry, if I sort this spreadsheet, I can group together all of my full sun and dry things, and then I can take a look at what different things I have blooming and when they're blooming. So I can see where my gaps are. So let's just say I'm putting all of this stuff in the same spot. Let's just pretend it all goes in the same area. I can look and see that, I don't really have a whole lot blooming in May. So I might want to look at some things that bloom more in the early spring. And November, I've only got one thing, showy goldenrod, blooming there in November. So I want some more late fall stuff then to add to this grouping too. Don't forget to add your grasses. If you see, I got little blue stem in there. And even though we don't really think about grasses as blooming, they really do. And they really do add some interest when they're blooming. So don't forget those as well. So that's, again, me being totally nerdy and, a dataholic here, but it will help when you're going to plant. It helps you to plan out what you're going to use. All right, let's deep dive here into some plants. I'm going to check. Here we go. Okay. All right. So now here are some things that bloom kind of early in the spring. Keep in mind though that when plants bloom, they're going to be going, they don't just bloom in 1 month, and they don't always bloom in the same month. A lot depends on the weather. So there's a lot of wiggle room here. So, don't get too hung up on everything blooming exactly when you were told it was going to bloom. Some things like the wild ginger there at the bottom, that flower is almost inconsequential because it's underneath that mass of leaves and you're not even really going to see it. But those leaves come up super early in the spring, and then they're going to last all summer long. So you're going to have this nice dense mat of ground cover all summer long. If it gets a little dry in the summer, they may wilt a little bit until the next rain, and then they'll perk up again. But those wild ginger is honestly one of my favorite ground covers because those leaves are just, I think they're just adorable. And it persists a lot. It likes more shade, but if you've got a shady area, something underneath a tree that you really need to, you want to get a ground cover in there, wild ginger is perfect for that. But then on the other hand, you've got something like Virginia bluebells. Those are going to pop up early in the year. They usually bloom, right around my birthday. So early May, late April, right? The bluebells start to go. They smell like Fruit Loops. Everybody says I'm nuts, but if you remember that cereal from when you were a kid, they smell exactly like Fruit Loops. Anyway, they make this beautiful mass of bluish purple flowers. And by June or so, they're gone. They just totally disappear. There is nothing left of them. They go completely away. So you want to make sure then wherever you plant those bluebells, you got something coming up to take their place. Pussy toes, that's another nice little ground cover. I think if I'm not mistaken, it likes a little more sun than the wild ginger does, but it also makes a very nice ground cover with really weird looking flowers, which for those of you who have been in my webinars for a while know I am a big fan of the weird looking flowers. That Jack in the Pulpit there in the upper right, that is one of my favorites. Anyway, wild hyacinth, somewhat similar to its more cultivated cousin, if you plant hyacinths, but it is another really fun one to have in the spring. And of course, wild garlic, you can't go wrong with the allium family. Always have really cool flowers, and they smell and taste like garlic. All right, so moving on then, also in the spring, don't forget our trees and shrubs. Red buds, one of my favorites, because man, right about that time when you have had enough of winter and you're ready to move south, those red buds start to pop, and it is just this vibrant pink, sometimes against a snowy landscape even. And it's just perfect. It's exactly what I need. So red buds are one of my all-time favorite little trees. Solomon seal is a fun one, kind of a nondescript little flower you can see down there, but the leaves are really interesting and they persist for a while too. So that's a nice one and easy to grow. Likes a little bit of shade, but when it's happy, it will fill in and make a nice little patch. Wild geraniums, another one that will start to bloom in the spring. Sometimes you'll even get a second flush of them later on in the summer and even into the fall. So I got 2 flushes of flowers out of my wild geraniums this year. It was cool. Columbine is another one that's really easy to grow. If you plant 1, you'll have 3 next year, and then you'll have 27 the following year. But, hey, it's all good. And then prairie smoke is another fun one too, right? Look at that weird flower that it's got going on. But another nice, good around edges, around sidewalks, things like that. Really, really nice plant. All right, now we're moving into early summer. Things are starting to warm up. Some of those spring ephemerals are dying back. Other things are really starting to take hold. That Queen of the Prairie, that's another great one. I planted one of those in my rain garden, and I had one for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden last year, I've got 37 of them popping up everywhere. I guess it just suddenly decided it liked it. So, but those great sprays of almost like cotton candy like flowers are great. I love some Queen of the Prairie. And of course, we got to give a shout out to butterfly weed down there for being part of the milkweed family. That's good for our monarchs. So if you're trying to bring monarchs into your yard, don't forget to plant some milkweeds. Penstemon, also called foxglove beard tongue. That's another fun one too. It's got a really nice, really hardy kind of leaf to it, along with those little sprays of flowers. So it's that's another nice one to have there. Royal catchfly, you really can't beat that bright red flower, right? Very sparse, but boy, do they pop. And then phlox is another one that can make a really nice mass of color when it blooms. Moving on into the late summer, now our gardens are really going, right? There's so much, it was hard to pick what to feature on here, but some of my favorites, blazing star, lead plant, Joe Pyeweed, all of those are big butterfly magnets. So if you are trying to bring butterflies to your yard, man, that's the way to do it. Lots of different kinds of blazing star you can plant, a couple different kinds of Joe Pyeweed. Be careful with that when it gets a little tall. It also tends to go a little bit nuts. It can be a little aggressive in a garden. So watch your Joe Pyeweed, watch where you put that. But it's a great one. Butterflies love it. I raise some monarchs for educational purposes. And I'll tell you what, when I let them go, they go straight to the Joe Pyeweed. So that's a great one. Coreopsis is another nice one that likes sunny areas. There's a wide variety of Coreopsis. So no matter what your conditions, there is probably a Coreopsis that will fit. And they just have that really vibrant yellow, really nice plant. And then spiderwort. I love spiderworts. They've got those, you know, long grass-like leaves almost. And then you get these little 3-petaled purple flowers on there. So always a nice one too. And turtlehead, again, another one likes wetter areas too. Rattlesnake master, once again, I got to get the weird ones in here. I love me some weird flowers, right? Rattlesnake master looks like something that should be coming out of the Southwest, right? It looks like it's a succulent or something like that. And then it gets these little like ball-shaped flowers at the top. So it's a really cool one. I like rattlesnake master a lot. And the eponymous cone flowers, we see them absolutely everywhere. Moving into fall now, we've got our bee balm and our black-eyed Susans. Again, bee balm's another one that can get a little aggressive. So there's a couple of different types. I think one is more aggressive than the other, but again, adds some really nice color. And another one that's a favorite of pollinators, Anise hyssop or Agastache. That's another one that's really good for pollinators too. Side oats grama is a really fun grass. So if you're looking for native grasses to put in, right, don't discount grasses when you're planting your gardens. They can take up space. They can help support other plants, the taller stuff, to keep them from being too floppy and just kind of give some structure to your garden. So don't forget to add some grasses into your plantings. Obedient plant is cool. And for those of you who don't know, it gets its name from, so you see all the little flowers, almost like snapdragons, right, growing up along the stem. If you move those flowers around the stem, they'll stay where you put them. So you can kind of move them, rearrange them around the stem, and they'll just kind of stay where they're put. It's a weird thing, but you know, it is what it is. But it's another one that's really cute and blooms a lot and is just a great landscaping plant. And then the asters, as we mentioned, there's tons and tons of different asters. So depending on your conditions, depending on what you're looking to do, lots of different asters that you can put into your garden, and they make great end of the year food for our pollinators that are migrating through. So obviously the one that everybody knows about is the monarch butterfly, and the monarch butterfly has to make this really long trek from up here in the north to get all the way down to Mexico. And they need fuel to make that trip because it's a really long trip to make. And see my webinar on monarchs if you want to learn more about that. But asters, by blooming so late in the fall, it's sort of their pit stop, right? It gives them that little bit of fuel so they can keep on moving their way south. And as I mentioned before, we don't want to forget winter. Winter is a really important time to have stuff out there, both for pollinators to overwinter, for birds to find food, for other little critters to have a refuge, and to, you know, find a place to shelter themselves from whatever's going on. So having something with some structure, like you can see the prairie dropseed, it makes those mounds, right? And make sure we leave this stuff up, because if we clear everything out of our gardens at the end of the year, we are getting rid of the overwintering pollinators. We're getting rid of the food for the birds. We're getting rid of all this shelter. So leave this stuff standing until, quite honestly, you know, like mid-May, at least where we are here in the Chicago region. And because that's when those pollinators are starting to come out again. And then you can clear stuff out. If you absolutely must do some late fall cleanup in your yard, leave things standing about 15 inches, right? Cut everything evenly to about 15 inches. This is a process that's followed by the award-winning Lurie Gardens in Chicago. Helps to keep them look a little bit neater since they are a more formal type of garden, but still provides that overwintering refuge for the critters. So you can see the shrubby St. John's wort there down at the bottom. Look at how cool those seed capsules look, right? When you're looking out over the snowy landscape, there's something interesting there for you. Same with the red twig dogwood. Just like its name says, those red twigs look really striking against that snow. It's honestly, it's really one of my favorite shrubs because it's got interest, I feel, all year long. So that's a great one to have. And then you got something like that black chokeberry down there in the bottom right. It's got those berries on there that will persist throughout the winter that birds will eat. Fun fact, when fruits are left on shrubs and trees too long, they will start to ferment. And as some of you may know, when things ferment, they create alcohol. It is actually possible for birds and raccoons and other animals to get drunk off of these fruits. So they're fine afterwards, just, like you may have been after New Year's, little imbibing too much. But there was a whole news thing out because birds were they were seeing birds swaying on the branches and people were really worried that they were sick, but it turns out they were just eating these fermented berries and getting a little tipsy. Anyway, up in the upper left there, we've got common witch hazel. Now, this is another one of my favorites because witch hazel, depending on which one you get, there is one that blooms in the late fall, and there's one that blooms in the early winter. So we're talking like blooming in November, December, or February, right? Absolutely nothing else is blooming out there, but this witch hazel, that's its strategy. And I actually did a deep dive on this at one point because I got to thinking okay, things bloom so they can be pollinated, but if it's blooming in the winter, well, what is pollinating it at that time? Well, it turns out there is a moth that will somehow be able to be out and about over the winter, and it is what will pollinate witch hazel flowers. So cool little fact there. But yeah, witch hazel is really cool. I talked to a guy, I was doing yard visits, and he had two 20-year-old witch hazel shrubs in his yard. They both looked fantastic, beautiful, beautiful shrubs. And he showed me a picture he had taken of it blooming in the snow. So again, when we're talking about winter interest and, needing to see those signs of life in the winter, you really don't get much better than that. So make sure when you are putting things together that you don't forget winter. There is still stuff going on. You can still have an attractive, lovely garden, especially if you've got bird feeders out and you've got birds coming to them. You want to have a place for the birds to take some refuge as well. So having this kind of thing in there really does help those birds. So as those of you who have seen our webinars before know, we do a program called the Conservation at Home program through the Conservation Foundation, where you give us a call if you are in our area and we can come to you. We do free landscape consultations in your yard. And when you meet a list of criteria, so one of the most predominant being you have a variety of native plants in your yard, you can get certified and get that lovely little sign that shows off to your neighbors, hey, I know what I'm doing. So if you are in Kane, Kendall, DuPage, or Will counties, you can drop me an email and I can get you to the right person. Or if you are in one of these other counties, we have some franchisees who work with us to do this. And if you are not in any of those areas, you can also go to, as I mentioned earlier, findalandtrust.org. And that website, you can find your local land trust, and they may be able to help you as well. And you can let them know about the Conservation at Home program and see if they want to also become a franchisee. So lots of different options depending on where you live to get help with your own landscape issues. If you are interested in getting more involved with the Conservation Foundation, there's a number of things you can do, including becoming a member. As I mentioned at the top of this webinar, you can go to our website, click the little button, and sign up to become a member, make a donation. You can visit our McDonald farm in Naperville or our Dixon Merced farm in Montgomery. The McDonald farm is an actual working farm, 60 acres, kind of right in the middle of Naperville. And that is where our Green Earth Harvest program is, and growing all the organic veggies your family could need. The Dixon Merced farm is a historic farm, and they do a lot of events there, mostly focused around farming and kind of the historic farming of the area. You can also follow us on all the social medias. I think we no longer maintain the Twitter page, but we've got Facebook, we've got Insta, we've got all of that. So follow us and you can find out about more upcoming webinars, a lot of the other activities we got. And as I mentioned, our 50th anniversary is this year. So we've got all kinds of really cool things coming up, hikes and lots and lots and lots of cool stuff coming up. So definitely check us out for there. And then you can also get your yard certified if you are in one of our service areas there too. So drop me a line and I can help you with that. All right, and with that, I will take any questions. I love this sign here. If something is not eating your plants, then your garden is not part of the ecosystem. One of the things that I, of course, have had to sort of come to terms with is that it's okay if there are holes in your leaves, right? That means that your garden is doing what it's supposed to do. It's feeding the critters. It's why we have butterflies and moths and bees and all of that. We are providing food for them. All right, with that, now let's go to some questions. Jessica asked, that's an excellent spreadsheet. Is there a way to share it? Quite honestly, it's really just something I sort of threw together real quick. That little screenshot right there, just I wanted to make it nice and neat. And really you can just make your own however your brain works. I put it together how my brain works, but not everybody works that way. So it's just real quick using the Prairie Moon Nursery page or the Possibility Place website. Both of those, they all have really, really excellent data that you can put into your own spreadsheet that way. Barb, I'm not sure what you're asking. You say name of plant info resource. I'm not sure what plant info resource you want. If you want, give me a little more information. Siri says, does the soil need to be dry for the jar test? It doesn't. It doesn't really matter because you're adding your own water to it. So just as long as you're really looking at the different particle sizes. So whether the soil is wet, whether it's dry, it doesn't really matter. You add your own water. The dish soap helps to break apart the proteins and fats and stuff that are in there. So it's because you're not concerned about the weight of the soil, you're just looking at what settles out. So it doesn't matter if it's wet or dry. See, Gail says the U of I extension in DuPage County doesn't do soil testing, but they have a list of companies that provide that service. That's correct. I was looking to see where you could get some of these soil tests. For some reason, most of them are in like central Illinois. So our area doesn't have a whole lot, but there are some private companies if you're, really desperate to know more information about that. Again, the jar test is so easy and almost kind of foolproof. So good way to do that there. All right, moving on. The names of the two witch hazels. I think it's just vernal and autumnal, maybe. It's, the genus name for witch hazel is Hamamelis. And It's pretty much anything that has that Hamamelis genus name is a witch hazel. It's the only plant that exists in that genus. So if you just look up witch hazel, you can see the two different ones. I'm not sure if one of them is easier to find than another. I know I have seen them for sale at like Possibility Place and other native plant nurseries. Marsha wants to know what to plant under a pagoda dogwood. Well, some is going to depend on what your soil conditions are like there. I'm assuming if there's a dogwood there and it's doing well, it's probably pretty damp. But again, that wild ginger is a really good ground cover. And really my favorite, wild geranium is another one that's good. It likes the shade. It can handle, part shade, part sun. And it's another nice one that stays fairly low. Those would probably be, two of my big recommendations for there, but a lot's going to depend on some of the other conditions as well. Someone else says, are Japanese beetles part of our ecosystem? Well, as the name would imply, unless you live in Japan, they're not. They are an exotic invasive species, which is why they do so much damage. In their own ecosystem, there are other systems in place, i.e. they have predators that will eat them and help take care of them. Here, they don't have as many predators because they did not evolve alongside all the other things that are in our native local ecosystems. So that's why they can come in and do so much damage. Same with gypsy moths, things like that. They are all invasive stuff. As an aside, the new invasive that we all need to be looking out for, at least here, last I heard, they have not quite hit Illinois yet, but they were definitely in Pennsylvania heading towards you, Ohio, and Michigan, were the spotted lanternflies. Again, imported from another country. And unfortunately, they're here and they're causing problems. So, something that you can control for. And honestly, one of the best ways to control for them is to just go out in the morning with a jar of soapy water and knock them off into the jar. The soap coats their wings so they can't fly, and then they end up drowning, and you can get rid of them that way. Let's see. Is there a resource or website that provides easy info on when different plants bloom? Well, Scott, the source that I used was quite simply just the Prairie Moon Nursery website and the Possibility Place website, two of my favorite native plant nurseries that are local. Well, Possibility Place is local to me. Prairie Moon ships here in the Midwest. So if you go to the pages of any of the individual plants there, they will tell you, here's how tall they get, here's how much sun they need, how much water they need, and when they bloom. So that'll help you set up your own chart however you want to. I don't know of any site that had it laid out quite like I had my little graph. But they'll get you started that way. The nice thing about both of those websites is you can do a search. So you enter in your criteria. So let's say you're planting in an area that is sunny and dry. You can put in full sun, dry, and you want something that blooms in June. And it'll spit back a whole list of plants to you that bloom in June. That's actually what I did when I was making up my little spreadsheet there. Any good books I can recommend on native plants here in the Illinois area? Let me see. Well, I just so happen to have, I'm going to stop my share here so you can see. Okay, so I have here Edelman and Schwartz. We have the Midwest Native Garden, right? So that's a good one. Charlotte Edelman, the Midwestern Native Garden. Also Edelman and Schwartz, Midwestern Native Shrubs and Trees. So if you're looking for a shrub and tree. thing here. My favorite is Illinois Wildflowers. Love, love, love this book, especially because they're sorted by color. I don't know if you can see in here. So these are, it's a good tool to use for identifying things, just because if you're like, oh, hey, look at that pretty purple flower. You can go to the section that is purple and flip through until you find what you're looking for. So those are a couple of my recommendations. Obviously, anything by Doug Tallamy is wonderful. He's more based on the East Coast, but a lot of the plants are the same, believe it or not. So just, really great resources there. Let's see. Joan wants to know, any thoughts of growing any of the mentioned plants in planters versus in the yard? Okay, so there are some you can, but it's kind of hit or miss. Part of the reason native plants are so good is because their roots are so long. When you put them in a planter, they're really stunted and their roots can't go down that 15, 20 feet. Most people don't have planters quite that big. So it's, they're not great. They always don't thrive in planters. I think I've heard butterfly weed will work in a planter, but it probably won't come back the next year. So they become almost more like annuals because, their roots can't get down to where they need to go. And then, all right, books we covered. Yeah, and there's tons of websites out there too. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but if you do a quick Google search, there's all kinds of stuff in there. Oh, Carol to the rescue. Yes, Hamamelis virginiana is the common witch hazel, and Hamamelis vernalis is the vernal witch hazel. See, I knew vernal was in there somewhere. Thank you, Carol. Let's see. Great places to buy native plants. Great question. So I've mentioned a couple of my favorites. So if you are local here in the Chicago region, Possibility Place is a good one. They are located in Monee, Illinois, here in Will County. So I'm very fortunate to have them close by. I can call Kelsey anytime I want and annoy him. There is also, for trees and shrubs, there's a place in Mokina called Native Roots and Canopies. They are a good friend of the Conservation Foundation and have lots of great stuff. There's another one in Naperville, like a garden center that sells a lot of Midwest ground covers, plant material. The Growing Place, thank you. Yes, the Growing Place in Naperville and Aurora, they have it. There are also a number of native plant sales that go on usually in the spring. The Conservation Foundation, we have one. The Foundation for the Will County Forest Preserve District, they have one. Many of the local forest preserves have them. You can go to the Illinois Native Plant Society's website, and they tend to keep a big list of native plant sales. So, like I said, they usually happen somewhere around Mother's Day. I know like the DuPage County Forest Preserve District had them. So if you go to the Illinois Native Plant Society's website, they keep a kind of running list of who's having native plant sales and when. So that's a good one. Let's see. Oh, Kathy asks, is it better to start using seeds or plants? That is a really, really good question. A lot depends on how experienced you are. For the novice, new gardener, and if you're starting with if you're planting a smaller area, using plugs is always going to be the easiest way to get right away. To get your garden started right away. Native plants are notoriously hard to start from seed. Many of them require an overwintering period. So, even things like milkweed, people say plant them directly in the snow. So they need that freeze thaw cycle in order to break open that seed coat and the seed can germinate. So yeah, unless you like, please experiment all you want. There's a lot of different methods out there. There's all kinds of websites on winter sowing and how to do, different things with milk jugs and all of that. But for the beginner novice, starting from plugs is going to be your easiest way to do it. And the nice thing is you can plant those plugs anytime throughout the year. So you don't have to, there's no like magic window in the spring that if you miss that, well, you're done for the year. Native plants, you can plant them anytime. My joke is always, the best time to plant them is in the spring. The second best time to plant them is whatever day today is. As long as the ground isn't frozen, you can plant them. All right, let's see. Oh, yes. Thank you, Jessica. U of I Extension's got a great native websites too. I'm going to throw this just in case people can't see it. I'm going to throw it into the chat. And there you go. So I just put that link in the chat for the Illinois Extension's website there. So that's a good one. Natural Garden Natives, they have a website too that, oh, okay. So they show independent garden centers too. Okay, that's good. As well as information on plant cultivation. So I'll throw that in the chat too. So it's naturalgardennatives.com. Pre-orders for the plant sales. I mean, it depends on the organization and when they're having their sale, but normally I start to see those maybe end of March, early April, I think is when they usually start. Depends on when they have them. Most of the sales are, like around Mother's Day-ish, either the week before or the weekend of Mother's Day. So, some do pre-orders, some do just kind of show up and shop. A lot depends on what's going on. Scott asked, what's the average full growth time expected for a garden to be fully grown? One of my both favorite and least favorite things about gardening is gardens are never done. Like I will be putzing in my garden forever. Something starts taking over. So you rip some of that out and put something else in, and something else died. So it's time to put something else in there. Generally, they say 3 years. So when you start on your garden, expect it to take about 3 years to really start to fill in. So the way the saying goes is the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. So in other words, the first year, they're really spending all their energy putting down those roots, getting those roots established. Second year, they're sort of finishing off the roots, and then they can start to work on the top growth. Third year, they're set and they're going. So generally expect about 3 years for a garden to really look like it's filling in. Let's see. Joan says, any thoughts or ideas on native edible plants? As a matter of fact, we have done an entire webinar on that. If you go to our YouTube channel, just search the Conservation Foundation on YouTube, you can find a webinar we did just a couple of months ago now on edible natives. So yeah, there's all kinds of great stuff, nuts and berries and seeds and, all kinds of great stuff. Marsha wants to know, is there a native conifer that stays around 15 feet? In the Chicago area, I know it's not 100%. There's not a whole lot of conifers that are native in the Chicago region. If you go further north, if you head towards Wisconsin, yeah, absolutely. There's tons of them up there. The problem is, at least around this area, the soils tend to be too full of clay, and the conifers just really don't like it. There is an eastern red cedar. There's arborvitae. Arborvitae is one, but I mean, that's a smaller one. There's just not a whole lot of conifers that like it here. I think I don't know if it doesn't get cold enough, if the soils are wrong. Just, yeah. Just not a ton of conifers, unfortunately. And, once again, You can try and force that square peg into the round hole. It's never going to thrive. And it's, I just actually removed now the probably 4th and 5th conifers from my yard that were planted from when we originally moved in 16 years ago, because they're now 20 feet tall and diseased and looking really terrible. So maybe I have a bias against conifers. I don't know. I don't think they grow very well here. Let's see, recommendations for native trees in smallish urban areas to attract birds. Oh, that is a whole deep dive. Pretty much anything, if it puts out berries, if it puts out nuts and seeds, obviously stay away from buckthorn, stay away from honeysuckle, right? Those two are, but anything that is truly native. So you've got things like dogwoods, you've got things like serviceberry. Serviceberry is a great one. It's more of a shrub, but it's a tall shrub. Hazelnuts, chestnuts, not chestnuts, hazelnuts, pecan. Although the pecan's more native to Southern Illinois, not technically native up here. There's a lot of suggestions. If you are looking for more, drop me an email. I do a more deep dive. I don't have them all off the top of my brain, unfortunately. Viburnum, thank you, Anonymous. Viburnum's another good one for birds, yeah. All right, let's see what else we got here. Yes, Dennis says oaks are the most beneficial trees in terms of bird and wildlife value. Yeah, if you can plant an oak, 100%, always plant an oak. Maples have been really overplanted, even though some of them are native here. They've really been overplanted in subdivisions and things. So I tend to try and shy away from those. If you can plant an oak, plant an oak. As far as insects go, they're a host plant for innumerable insects, great for birds. The acorns are food for squirrels and blue jays and all kinds of stuff. So just really tons of value in planting oaks. Okay, once again, the website for native plant sales, it's the Illinois Native Plant Society. I don't know their website off the top of my head. I can try and look it up, but if you just Google Illinois Native Plant Society, in addition to being a great organization, they also have that native plant list. Okay, it's just illinoisplants.org. And then, oh, here, top link they've got there has their native plant sales on there. They've probably not been updated yet this year. There you go. There is the link, illinoisnativeplants.org / native plant sales. We'll have the list of native plants that are on there. So hopefully that helps. Again, if there are questions I wasn't able to get to, if you think of questions after we log off here, please feel free to send me an email. My email address is the one that all the webinar stuff was sent to you from. You should get a follow-up email on this too. So if you have any questions, just send a reply to that and I would be happy to look into that for you. So we are at 8 o'clock here. So I think it is about time for us to wrap up. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I really am so happy you all joined me tonight, gave me part of your evening. And thanks for joining us. Hope you will join us again in February, first Wednesday in February, same bat time, same bat channel. So we can talk all about soils. So I've got a whole bunch more. I've got all the webinars now planned up through May. So we should be good. We got a lot of really great stuff. I'm very excited to see what all we've got going on and to see all these presentations, all these special guests that I'll be bringing into you too. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a good night. Stay safe. Stay warm. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.